Long before Europe trusted modern engineering, it trusted faith. Gothic cathedrals rose during an age of war, disease, and uncertainty, not because they were practical, but because people believed they pointed toward heaven. Every stone reflected both the fear of death and the hope of eternal life. Many of these masterpieces took centuries to complete, with generations working on a vision they would never see finished. In this video, we will explore 7 of Europe's most magnificent Gothic cathedrals. These are not just beautiful buildings, they are timeless symbols of faith, history, and human determination that have survived kings, wars, and the passing of centuries. Subscribe and join us as we discover the stories hidden within stone, light, and faith. Number 7 is Burgos Cathedral in northern Spain. On the 20th of July in 1221, 2 men laid the first stone. One was King Ferdinand III of Castile. The other was the local bishop, a man history knows as Maurice. And Maurice was English. He was a churchman from England who had ended up running a diocese in the middle of Spain, and he had traveled through France on royal business, where he saw the new pointed churches going up around Paris. He came back convinced that Burgos needed one. So the first true Gothic cathedral in Spain was ordered by an Englishman using French ideas in a Spanish town on the pilgrim road to Santiago. That should be enough foreignness for one building, but Burgos was not finished. Work stopped for nearly 200 years. Then, in the middle of the 1400s, a German mason arrived. The Spanish called him Juan de Colonia, which simply means John of Cologne, because that is where he came from. He gave Burgos its 2 open-work stone spires, carved so finely they look like lace holding itself up in the air, and his son, Simon, carried on after him. Here's the part that should stop you. Cologne, John's home city, had its own enormous cathedral standing half-built with no towers at all, and it would stay that way for another 4 centuries. A man from Cologne gave Spain the spires his own city could not finish. People often describe Burgos as nothing more than a rest stop on the Pilgrim Road, a place travelers pass through. The building itself says otherwise. Under the Great Dome lies the tomb of El Cid, the warrior Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar, and his wife Jimena, whose bones were brought here in 1921 for the cathedral's 700th birthday. Bishop Maurice is buried in the choir under a metal-covered tomb. High on a wall, there is a 16th century clock with a carved figure whose mouth opens every hour, which locals call the flycatcher. In 2021, Spain marked 800 years with a special coin and a stamp. This is not a waiting room. It is a treasure chest with a king's champion inside it. Number 6 is Milan Cathedral in Italy, and its real story is not the one you usually hear. Work began in 1386 under Archbishop Antonio da Saluzzo and the ruler of the city, Gian Galeazzo Visconti. Everyone remembers the white marble and the forest of spires on the roof. Almost nobody remembers what Visconti actually did, which was far cleverer than building a pretty church. In October 1387, he set up an organization to manage the work, and days later he handed that organization the marble quarries at Candoglia, up in the mountains, forever. Not for a year, not for his lifetime, forever. That single decision is why the building exists. The organization still owns those quarries today. Blocks cut there are still stamped with 3 letters meaning "for the use of the works," a mark that once let them travel toll-free all the way to the city. The marble was too heavy for roads, so canals were dug across the countryside so the stone could float in by water. Milan literally reshaped its rivers to feed one building, and that organization has now been running without a break for 639 years. It is one of the longest continuously working bodies in Europe. The men who built it were, once again, outsiders. Visconti wanted a Northern European look, not a local one, so engineers and masons were pulled in from France and Germany. One French expert named Jean Mignot inspected the work and told the Italian masons flatly that their maths was wrong, that skill without knowledge is worth nothing. They argued with him for years, and out of that argument came a building that belongs to no single country's style. There are around 135 spires. The golden statue of the Virgin on top stands about 108 meters up, put there in the 1700s, and for a long time nothing in Milan was allowed to rise above her. The last bronze door was finished in 1965, nearly 6 centuries of work, paid for by a mountain given away forever by a man who never saw a single spire completed. Number 5 is St. Vitus Cathedral inside Prague Castle in the Czech Republic. In 1344, Charles IV, King of Bohemia and later Holy Roman Emperor, decided his capital needed a cathedral to match its new importance. He did not hire a Czech. He sent for a Frenchman named Matthias of Arras, who had been working at the papal palace in Avignon. Matthias laid out the eastern end in careful French style and then died in 1352 with only the lower parts standing. What happened next is one of the boldest hiring decisions in the history of building. The emperor gave the job to a 23-year-old German mason named Peter Parler from a small town in Swabia, 23. He ran that cathedral site for 47 years until he died in 1399, and he did not simply copy his French predecessor, he invented. He threw ribbed patterns across the ceiling and nets and stars that nobody had built before, and he carved a row of stone portrait heads in the upper gallery showing real people, including himself, which almost nobody did in that century. Parler came from a whole family of builders. His father Heinrich worked at Ulm, his son Johann at Kutna-Hora, relatives at Freiburg. One family spreading across an empire, leaving cathedrals behind them like footprints. Yet the building they started sat unfinished for hundreds of years. Wars stopped it. Money stopped it. The nave simply was not there, and a wall closed off the gap. Now here's the part that turns the usual story on its head. People say St. Vitus exists to make rulers look holy, to crown kings and bury emperors. It did all of that, but it was not a king who finished it. Joseph Cranmer, then Joseph Mocker, then Camille Hilbert carried the work through the 1800s and into the 20th century, and the cathedral was finally consecrated as complete on the 28th of October 1929. That date was chosen on purpose. It was the 11th birthday of Czechoslovakia, a young republic with no king at all. The building meant to prove that rulers were chosen by God, was completed to celebrate a country that had got rid of its emperor. 2 years later, the artist Alphonse Mucha added a window in glowing colors, and a rose window by František Kyselä had gone in shortly before. The throne was gone. The cathedral was finished anyway. Number 4 is Chartres Cathedral, about 80 kilometers from Paris, and its real story is rougher than the peaceful one usually told. On the night of the 10th of June in 1194, lightning hit the roof. By morning, almost everything was gone. Only the 2 west towers, the carved doorway between them, and the crypt underneath survived. Worse, the people believed they had lost the thing that made Chartres matter at all, a piece of cloth said to have been worn by the Virgin Mary, given to the church around the year 876 by a Frankish king. 3 days later, priests came up out of the crypt carrying it, unharmed. They had locked themselves underground behind iron doors when the fire started and simply waited. A visiting papal official, Cardinal Melior of Pisa, told the crowd this was a sign that Mary wanted a greater house. What followed was astonishingly fast. In about 26 years, they raised almost the entire cathedral you can walk into today, along with most of its colored glass. Nothing else in Gothic building history moved at that speed, but it was not a happy town singing hymns. Somebody had to pay, and the money came out of ordinary pockets. The people of Chartres revolted. They attacked the bishop's house and drove him out of the town, and he stayed away in exile for 4 years. That is the truth behind the beautiful glass. Faith built it, and taxes nearly broke it, and both things were true at the same time. The arguments never stopped either. Between 2009 and 2017, the dark interior was cleaned and repainted in pale colors, on the claim that this is how it first looked. Not everyone agreed. The American critic Martin Filler called the work a scandalous desecration in print, and in France, the writer Adrien Getz argued the glass had lost its power now that the walls were bright. Walk in today and you are walking into a live argument about whether an old building should look old. 800 years on, people are still fighting about Chartres, which is the surest sign it is not a museum. Number 3 is Canterbury Cathedral in England, where this story began. In December 1170, Archbishop Thomas Becket was killed inside his own church by 4 knights who believed they were carrying out the king's will after Henry II lost his temper about him. Murder in a holy place. It shook Europe. One of the killers, William de Tracy, later handed over 100 shillings a year in guilt money, and the record of that gift still survives. Becket was made a saint within 3 years, and pilgrims began arriving in numbers nobody had planned for. Then in 1174, a fire destroyed the eastern end. The monks needed a builder and chose William of Sens, the Frenchman from the start of this story, for his lively mind and his reputation. Instead of patching the damage, he told them to pull the burnt section down completely and build in the new French manner, bringing pointed arches, ribbed ceilings, and outside supports across the sea from ideas he had seen in Paris. English building changed permanently because of that. Then came the fall in 1179, the broken body, the orders given from a bed, the retreat home, and his death in 1180. The man who took over is known to history only as William the Englishman. We do not know his surname, his birthplace, or his face. A Frenchman began England's greatest church, and an anonymous Englishman finished it. Becket's shrine was completed in 1220 and became the richest pilgrimage site in the country, until Henry VIII smashed it, took the treasure, and ordered that Becket was not to be called a saint anymore. And the arguments about authority in that building have not ended. On the 25th of March 2026, the cathedral held the installation of the 106th Archbishop of Canterbury, Sarah Mullally, the first woman ever to hold the post in around 1400 years. Her election had been confirmed in London that January. Before the service, she walked. She spent 6 days in March traveling on foot from London to Canterbury, the same road pilgrims took to reach Becket. A cathedral built around a murdered archbishop received its first female archbishop on foot. It is worth saying plainly that Canterbury has been the mother church of the Church of England since the Reformation, not a Catholic cathedral, and its Gothic bones are older than that split. Number 2 is Cologne Cathedral in Germany, and it holds a record almost nobody believes at first. It took 632 years to build. Work began in 1248 under a master mason named Gerhard, because the city had a prize worth housing. In 1164, the Archbishop of Cologne, Reinald von Dassau, had carried off from Milan the bones said to belong to the three kings of the Christmas story, and pilgrims were pouring in. The old church was not good enough. Then everything stopped. Around 1560, the money ran out. For nearly 300 years, the people of Cologne lived beside a half-built cathedral with a wooden crane parked on top of an unfinished tower, so long that the crane became part of the skyline and turned up in paintings of the city. Generations were born, grew old, and died under it. What restarted it is the best detail in this entire list. In 1814, the original medieval drawing for the west front, made around 1290, was found again after centuries. It is known as Plan F. Suddenly, the 19th century builders were not guessing at what the medieval masons had wanted. They had the actual sheet. In 1842, King Frederick William IV of Prussia laid a new foundation stone, and roughly half the cost was raised by ordinary citizens through a cathedral building association that still exists. On the 15th of October 1880, in front of Emperor Wilhelm I, the cathedral was declared finished. The towers reached 157 meters, and it was briefly the tallest building on Earth. The design was French in origin, borrowed from Amiens, finished by Germans, from a plan drawn by a man whose name we do not know. And it is still not really finished, because it never stops needing repair. Stone crumbles, and a workshop of masons works on it every day. That bill has grown so heavy, around 16 million euros a year, that on the 1st of July 2026, the cathedral began charging tourists an entrance fee for the first time in its history. 12 euros to go in, 8 more for the tower, 8 for the treasury, and nothing at all if you are coming to pray or light a candle. About 6 million people arrive every year, and almost all of them are visitors, not worshippers. The building that taught Europe how to wait is now selling tickets in order to keep waiting. Number 1 is Notre Dame de Paris, and it belongs here for a reason that ties this whole story together. Every other cathedral on this list was built by men who came from somewhere else. Notre Dame is the place they came from. The style was invented in the countryside around Paris in the 1100s, and Notre Dame, begun in 1163, was its loudest early statement. William of Sens copied its outside supports and carried them to England. Cologne's design came from the same French family of ideas. Prague's first architect was French. Milan sent for French engineers. Burgos got its shape because an English bishop rode through France and liked what he saw. 6 national treasures, 1 workshop tradition, and this is where it lived. On the 15th of April 2019, the world watched the roof burn and the spire fall. What followed was one of the largest restoration projects ever attempted, costing somewhere near 800 million euros and using more than 1,000 oak trees for a new timber roof, cut and shaped by the old methods. The cathedral reopened on the 7th and 8th of December 2024. In its first year back, it received around 11 million visitors, roughly 30% more than before the fire, according to the woman who manages visitor numbers there, Sybil Bellamy Brown. The bell towers opened again to climbers in September 2025, but the fight going on right now is about 6 windows. Along the south side of the nave sit stained glass panels made in the 1800s. They were not destroyed in the fire, they were dirty, they were cleaned, and they are fine. A competition was launched to replace them anyway. More than 100 artists applied, and a panel led by Bernard Blistein, who once ran France's National Modern Art Museum, chose the painter Claire Tabaret, a French artist in her 40s, who has worked for years in Los Angeles. Her design shows crowds of ordinary people of every age and background, bowed down in strong color. France split in two over it. The National Heritage Commission voted against the idea without a single vote in favor. A conservation group has threatened court action, arguing that removing undamaged historic glass breaks an international agreement on how old buildings should be treated. Supporters answer that the windows are only 19th century, that the cathedral has always taken in new work, and that a living church should not be frozen. When the full-size models were shown in Paris over the winter, about 4,000 people a day came to look and argue in the room. The glass is being made in Reims. The windows are due to be revealed in December 2026. So this is where the story lands. The men in this list were outsiders who arrived, changed a country's idea of what a building could be, and were resented while they worked. William of Sens tore down an English choir. Juan de Colonia handed Spain its spires. Jean Mignot told Milan its sums were wrong. Peter Parler was 23 and German and given an emperor's cathedral. Every one of them was, at the time, the strange choice. And now another outsider has been handed 6 windows in the most watched building in France, and the country is arguing exactly the way it always has. That argument is not a sign that Gothic architecture is dead. It is the clearest proof it is still alive. If you have ever stood inside one of these buildings, tell me which one and what you felt in that first moment when you looked up. Because I read every one of those, and I would love to know which of these 7 you would put at number 1.